Hey, Brad, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me, Brian. I watch all your content and I follow you, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I've been in sales for 25 plus years in a myriad of different roles, from direct selling all the way up to senior management, being responsible for operations as well, of all things. For the love of sales, I've been doing that for 25 plus years, and I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else.
Yeah. Were you a natural or was it a journey?
I think that it's difficult for somebody to truly tell you that they're a natural in terms of selling, right? We're selling
A
different
lot of
selling
people try.
situations. Yeah, well, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm a realist. I had an interest in selling, for sure. From an early age, whether it was curbing bikes or cars or other, just in that moment that you knew that there was a transaction to be had or taken place. I wanted to do that more.
Yeah.
And I found that, from an early age, I got into retail, like, some people do. I enjoyed it. I got into the golf industry, and I started to make a lot of connections there as well too. And I actually took a professional selling course in post-secondary. It was one of like none that were offered
Yeah.
that I quite liked. So I was selling golf equipment to the pro shop manager at Golf Course ABC. So it was a very natural fit. Arguably, probably one of my best post-secondary grades. And then I was about trying to find that first staple role into sales and get into it, get after it, and try to create some independence for myself. And that happened through business equipment sales, photocopier sales.
Yeah. Hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you want to cut your teeth, that's the place to do it.
It is. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and
Because
so yeah,
you
so
can't
did that.
carry it in and you have to go in by yourself and you're like,
Yep. Hunt, kill, eat, that whole deal. And try to be, and at the time they just started introducing like the digital technology. So it was the connected copier. So that copier did, it was like, it sliced it, diced it, it was like the photocopying, faxing, printing, scanning, like all these things. And that had just been introduced kind of in the late 90s. And I'm a curious guy by nature. Where you get the best out of me is you move that curiosity in terms of interest. And all the other legacy reps were just so busy with the lather and repeat pitch on the big green button and the red button. And mine was about, what else can you do with this device? What more value can it provide? Can you look at more of a decentralized model if you're doing all these other things? So if the nucleus is down, what happens? And just more of a business and workflow proposition. And I really enjoyed that. And I thought that was great. And that's, largely where I kind of cut my teeth and started having some fun.
and how did you come up with that approach or that mindset when you're surrounded by the pitch and push kind of?
Well, so sadly, I looked around. There were some really fantastic people, definitely
Yeah.
personalities. But I didn't. I thought that there was more, and I
Yeah.
thought that there was more opportunity. Instead of selling one photocopier, why not extend the sales cycle a little bit and sell three or four, right? And that was my mindset, was let's go past the selling of the photocopier to why they need the photocopier outside of the evil necessity,
Yep.
and really kind of get involved with the business and workflow processes that were behind the eventual use of clicking the print button, pressing the copy button, right? Doing those things. So
Well, and that's where the fun is, isn't it?
yeah,
Who wants to give the
absolutely.
same dog and pony, 5, 10 times a day?
Yeah, well, and that was my sell, my sell, my sell value prop in front of a client was, I always laughed and said, I'm not convinced that all of these six that you're looking at don't, probably, maybe they come out of the same factory where it's just like Canon,
Right. Yeah.
Xerox, like boom,
Like the
boom, boom.
Toyota Corolla
So
and
I
the,
said,
the
right.
GMC.
Yeah. So I said, the difference here is just the conversation that we're having right now. And when you're down, if you're down, because you will be down,
Yeah.
where's Brad going to be? Like, how can he help you, or how can our service help you, right? And I used to, I was like, when I was young, so, I was making six figures, 22, 23 years old,
Nice.
having the time of my life, if you will. And I would purposely on a Friday ensure that I had, and not so much a photocopier, but let's say a fax machine, like a backup machine in my hatch. And I would have toner for kind of the usual suspects, right? But I would be downtown, because downtown, that would start Brad's weekend would start downtown somewhere, right? I would have like the late lunch, and then Brad would be off into the sunset. But I would have all of the backup and the toner and the consumables with me. So if I had that call at 4 o'clock on a Friday, 10 minutes later, I was rolling in. They got finished their print job so they could go home and have a wonderful weekend. And they remembered that
They
always.
remember
And I
that.
just made a point of doing that on a very regular basis.
And that is a lot of stuff that reps overlook. It's
Of
like,
course.
I'll get to you on Monday,
Right.
but they need it now.
Yeah. Well, they do. And, kind of going back to the evil necessity of that commodity, like that may have ruined somebody's weekend. And if I can go down there very simply with a replacement toner, even put it in for them, wait until their print job is done, and maybe they can join me for the first beer that I have at the end of the day. Like, what's better than that?
Nothing.
Right?
Not
So
much.
I thought that was pretty darn good.
And I always find this weird, because when you think of a commodity, it just is paper or
Mhm.
toner or something like that.
Right. Right.
But our clients always want to put us in that commodity trap,
Always.
because they have all the power if you're a commodity.
Right.
They have no power if you're unique and I can't get it anywhere from you. That's a
Well,
monopoly.
that's a monopoly, exactly. So, and you're all if you're selling a commodity, you're trying to work towards the monopoly in terms of what you do, but you need to do that with conversation, people,
Value.
process,
Yeah. Help.
value, all of that, and creating that where it's meaningful. Like, I remember having like laughing sometimes with the prospects, saying like, this has got to be the last thing that you want to procure is this. And they would all agree. Of course it is. Like, no, but like, what's fun about buying a photocopier? Unless you're really into photocopying, and most were not.
Well, I mean, they become pretty sophisticated.
They have. They have.
Yeah. So
But realistically, though, would you rather furnish your office, or would you
almost
rather
any,
buy a
well,
photocopier?
just thinking about it, I think all I can think of is complexity. I
Correct.
buy the wrong one. It doesn't
Uh-huh.
do what I anticipated, or I can't figure out how to get it to do what I anticipated.
Well, right, and I think that's the key, is that you're exactly right, and the same thing how we consume technology. We probably say, like an iPhone, for example, we probably use less than 5% of functionality on a regular basis, right? Same thing happens with that commodity. So it's my job to make sure that that 5% is dialed in terms of what you're doing. All the presets are there. We're pushing one button and you're gone, right? So that little sneaker network or whatever that we used to talk about in kind of the photocopier days, that sneaker network is eliminated, because you know that it's there, you know what to do. Like, you don't necessarily, you could call me, but you don't necessarily have to. That's done for you. Like, keep it simple, make it simple for them, right?
And
Both the
what came after
processes.
copiers?
After photocopiers, I got into management consulting. So yeah, just a huge shift. Let's mix it up. Management consulting on records and information management, and then some of the ancillary services that would happen after that, which would be outsourcing, data capture, scanning of like those physical records, all those types of things.
Oh, so you were living on the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Living on the edge. So it went from that green button and that red button to the philosophy of, there could be a button. What would those buttons look like
Look
for
like
you?
if you
Right?
wanted
Like,
to.
let's govern those buttons and create some compliance around those buttons. And everybody knows these are the buttons that you need to push. This is what it looks like. And then rolling that out to the rest of the organization with, a good plan in terms of managing information, the governance of information, the importance of information, when to keep it, when to dispose of it, all that stuff.
And how did you become good at that? Because
Well,
that's probably
yeah,
more complex than the copiers.
way more complex. But again, I think it went back to Brad's curiosity of learning. So the evidence of business activity is the record, right? So it's trying to discern, and there's many ways to do it, is just how you manage the evidence of that business activity and that record specifically, if it's electronic or physical. So there was there was some data workflow conversations I would have in the other days, like the photocopier days, but this just took it, way past that. But curious guy by nature, became interested in the topic
Yeah.
and why it was important. What did it look like? And then trying to figure out, that risk profile to an organization, build examples, understand where those conversations are. What are the pain points? And the pain points of, say, in a acquisition or divestiture, not getting all the information that you paid for, right? And understanding even what that is. And then what are the implications 20 years down the road when that asset or facility fails, right? Who
Well,
did what, when, and how?
that's
Right.
huge, because I had a friend who sold this company, and the interrogation you go through in that process of proving all this stuff and having it all in order,
Right.
it's insurmountable. And if you
It
haven't got
it
your
really
stuff
is.
together,
It really is. I remember there was a project they were working on, and I had, so I was really good at kind of building out the business for the company. I think they're a $2.5 million business in 2007, or like that portion of the business. And we grew it to, I think, 32 or 35 in a few years. But I remember very vividly working on an opportunity where a large integrated oil and gas company in Canada was divesting a lot of its assets. And they didn't, so out in the field, they didn't know exactly what was out in the field. It could be boxes full of Brian's work boots, or boxes full of like land leases for properties that they may have already sold, are selling in the divestiture, or they own. So we went through this sanitization process. So physically actually going through discerning, and we charged by the linear filing inch. So instead of like time, like bodies and seats or bodies on site, we chose a rate factor or a measurement that made sense to them. And it was incredibly successful on the client side, but like the profitable was high double-digit profit based on what it looked like. But everybody was so incredibly happy, and the outcomes were there. Like, I remember celebrating as a team, as they kind of packaged up and buttoned up the rest of that divestiture. It was, just things like that. Just thinking outside of the box. It was an ancillary service that was incredibly important. It was costly and it was expensive, but it was all underpinned by the risk factor of not knowing what was there, where it was going, whose it was. And those conversations happen on a regular basis.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And where does curiosity come from? Were you always this way, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was. I mean, I was always a good student, and I always remember not having to work as hard as some others, depending on topics. Like I loved math and English composition. Loved all of that, and I think that served me really, really well in terms of what I was doing. But I think I've always had this little fire burning inside, and just in terms of being curious and learning and understanding why people do things, what compels them to be who they are. And for me personally, that was, it still is today. It still is today a large part of who I am. And I'm not necessarily going to master any of those skills. Like, I don't want to be any of the other professions, but I just, really want to learn the things that are important to them, and, potentially if there's any opportunity I can help.
Well, it's always such a critical ingredient in sales, because you can't really be empathetic unless you're curious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to care or connect with another person unless you're curious about them.
Right. And I don't think that, so in curiosity is kind of where it starts. Then you take that curiosity to actually interest.
Yes.
And that's where things become fun.
Yeah. Because when nothing better when somebody feels that someone else is interested in what they think, what they're doing.
Right. It's just like the conversation that, that we're starting today when you're having it with, say, a said prospect. tell me about your role, tell me about your business, tell me about the things that are important to you, tell me about where you want to go, like all those things. Not a lot of people ask those questions, but
No, no.
those individuals will, they'll completely and utterly overshare. They'll tell you exactly what it looks like who doesn't want to talk about the things that are of interest, not curious, of interest to them.
Because yeah, because what people do is the opposite. They, well, let me tell you how this copier works. The new model does this.
Right.
And
Right.
guess why you're now a commodity?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because you're not showing interest in me and what I do and what I need. You're pitching, commercializing a product,
Right.
and I'm not seeing any difference.
Right. And like throughout the time that we spent today, you'll never hear me talk about like the FABs of X, Y, and Z or the features and functionality, any of those types of things. Certainly there could be a time and a place for those conversations,
Sure.
but that is very distinct in terms of the sales process. And, if you're leading with that, that's not really a sales process. That is you're trying to check some boxes and hopefully get away with the sale. And that just lessens your probability of being successful.
And how did you become good at sales? What either situation or epiphany that you had that took your game to the next level?
Doing all those things. So I was talking about school was quite easy to me, and I probably could have my level of effort could have been different. I don't know. Maybe the practicum of the teaching and those types of things could have been different as well, where Brad would have been more interested and curious. That keeps me awake, or that doesn't keep me awake at night. That helps me sleep at night, thinking that way. But the things that helped me be successful in sales was doing the things that I wasn't very good at or I didn't really want to do, which was, like the management of my schedule. That was a huge, huge change for me, was just understanding when in the day I performed the best and what those tasks were,
Yes.
and setting it up, and then being ferocious in terms of managing my schedule was doing that. So, like a good example of that is, like back in the copier days, you would cold call, like physically, you would go into places
Yeah.
and be like, hey, like I'm the
Hi,
copier guy.
I'm
Let's talk
here.
about those things right there, big red, big green buttons, right? But so what I would do is I would complement that with, and I'd always do that either mid-morning or late afternoon, right? So I try to catch people on almost coffee break time
Yeah.
or near the end of the day where maybe the guard's down. They may give you a little more information, and realistically, that's just kind of like it's their prelude into or the next steps into their evening or weekend or other. But I would go out, so there'd be hopefully you'd have a base. So I would go up there and kind of visit the base, if you will. So you'd have this old, like you remember like the old dot matrix, like base
Sure.
report. So I take this thing with me, like literally I physically have it with me. So like, so I wasn't a spy coming into the organization. I actually had a reason. And this was my reason, this big, this big kind of chart and information. But I would specifically hit the base first and then look to see surrounding the base. And, when you eventually were good enough where you could actually have, say, like a more urban territory, like downtown, say,
Fantastic.
pick on a city, downtown Chicago, for example.
Yeah.
So you go to the top of the building. So depending on who's in the building, go to the top of the building all the way to the bottom of the building, right?
Yep.
And so I'd have the base report. So I'd go and visit, see how things work. Like, it's just amazing just talking to people and like, how are we doing? Like, wow, like I haven't seen somebody in here since, the last Brad sold me that. I was like, oh,
Really?
all right,
Wow.
well, let's have a conversation. How are we doing? What does it look like? And at times, you'd see competitor trials happening right next to your old piece of equipment. So that's a great conversation around,
Yep.
I'm here today. I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday, but let's have a conversation about tomorrow. Right. And then never be afraid to ask for, well, I'm, next door, Triton ABC is next door. Who is the, who is the Tammy next door? And like, oh,
Great question.
I know Sylvia really, really well. It's in the days where maybe like having a cigarette was a little more accepted. I go for a cigarette with her all the time. I was like, okay, well, I'd like to go next door to see, to go see her. Like, is there, do you have any issue with introducing me? She said, no, not at all. Let's go walk next door. Right. So asking earning the right and then asking for a reference, a referral, or that's a
Yeah.
portion of it. And then always post sale, you need to do those on a regular basis. So I was never afraid to ask. And I think that helped as well too. So being ferocious around time and just not being scared to ask, to ask, I think was really important for
Yeah.
me.
I think it's two parts, not being afraid to ask and doing it so well that it doesn't sound like you're asking.
No, you're just, I mean, and
You're talking.
genuinely speaking from a human interaction, most people want to help if they can,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And don't make it too inconvenient for them. We'll get to that maybe later, but is just it's very simple. And if they don't have time for it, that's okay. But then the follow-up is, well, can I cite, Tammy, can I
Yeah.
cite your
Can I
name when I
mention that we talked?
when I go talk to
Yeah.
Cynthia, so it's not such a cold call. It's more of just a warm conversation. Of course, I can't do it today, but please do, and then let me know how it went. So next time you're in area, maybe we can both go talk to her. Sure, okay, let's do that. And it didn't have to be like a male or female persona. It could be the either or, but just simple things like that, Brian.
And I think what you touched on is something that very few people really dig into, and that's the ferociousness about managing your time and understanding your time.
Right.
I think because I deal with a lot of sales reps, sales managers, just people in general. It's an advanced skill that everyone thinks is a beginner skill.
You absolutely have to be, and I think I do the same things reasonably in my personal life as well too. But it's important. I like to know, because there's so many dynamics that happen in terms of what we do. I like to know for the most part what that day could look like. Not
Yeah.
necessarily will look like, but could look like. And you plan appropriately for all of those things. And for me, I just found it incredibly helpful. And then because there is some flexibility that's created in this profession, and I will call it a profession because it is being able to, if you manage and own your schedule, then you can create and not just create, but fully justify what that flexibility looks like, right? And
Yes.
I think that that's why it's so important. And not everybody gets it, but like I don't feel bad at all that I had to get my winter tires on my vehicle during a sales day, but I planned around it. I've got my meetings, I've got blurred backgrounds. It doesn't matter if Brad's at the tire shop or Brad's in his home office, we can still do that, right? And
Oh,
it's just being meaningfully doing that. And then depending on what happens, and sometimes they're great icebreakers, right? If there's something happens in the background or other, it's a nice way to to let people know that you're a human being as well.
and I can almost tell how effective a salesperson is if they show me their calendar.
Right. Great.
And,
You're
and
right.
when and when I hear, oh, somebody needs to meet me at this time, I need to reschedule with you. And it's like, really, your time is that well blocked? No, there's somebody asked and it was overlap. Instead of pushing back a little and say, can you do it a half hour earlier or a half hour later?
Yeah.
Don't ask. They're a
Well,
slave to interruptions.
right. Well, you absolutely are. And just in terms of, coaching and mentoring, from a sales management perspective, that was something that I was very, very pointed on. Is it is okay to push back. It is okay
Yeah.
because your time is valuable. And there's a domino effect. So say if you have a day set up and somebody wants to try to change that time slot, then there's before and after another
Yep.
in terms of what you're doing. So there's a domino effect. So instead of always accepting that, and maybe you do it for a little while until
Get your
you
feet.
learn the
Yeah.
craft and get your feet wet, if you will. But then after that, it's just within reason, of course. If there's a really active sales cycle and it's,
Right. It's
you
the
know,
end of the quarter. Yeah.
yeah,
Things in
John,
procurement. They need one
yeah.
more detail before they issue it. Got
but
it.
but I will say, if you plan for it appropriately, know that's going to happen. You have blocks of time there,
Yes.
right? Like it is so simple, but not a lot of people do that very, very well.
Because to take the intellectual energy away, having a fixed pattern every week
Mhm.
keeps you grounded.
I need it for structure. Like
Yes.
typically, like I'm a rather esoteric guy, right? And we typically are. Um, and I needed the more structured, pragmatic approach to being effective. And then after being effective, and I understood it, I could be esoteric on what more could I do?
Yes.
You know,
In that order.
what more, yeah, exactly, what more could it be? And then I would create structure around that and some formality and some process. And then I need that as an individual. I thrive on that. Sadly, you know, that does creep into my personal life. My wife laughs with about me on a regular basis. You know, and she should be the more structured one. She's the finance, like she's the VP of finance. Like she should have some more structure, but I need it because I know specifically that the art of the possible for Brad sometimes becomes boiling the ocean. So I can't boil the ocean. I need to understand what portion or section or quadrant of that water body of water that I need to be involved in. And then we start pressing out, pushing forward, right?
Well, that's it, because sales productivity is really revenue over time.
Right.
We can't get any more time. We can only be more productive with that time, more effective with
You're
it.
exactly right. And that's why it's so critical.
And it's not putting more stuff in that time. It's getting more revenue out of that time.
Out of that time. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's the, you know, when I was watching one of your interviews a couple weeks back with, I think, Michael Grimstein, and Michael was talking about simplifying the sales pitch from, you know, like the double digit words all the way down to maybe 7 or 8. And I think the simplification as well too with your time happens as well as you don't necessarily need to be exactly as you said, doing 14 things instead of 12. It's doing 6 or 7 things really, really well, effectively. And I thought that's where that ripple effect of success, I think, happens for reps and others that are involved in sales.
You know, and even my sales engineer, I mean, he knew what we were doing. He
Right.
didn't know where we were going, but he knew what we do on, you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Right.
Mondays and Fridays, you do what you think is right. But we had, you know, travel typically Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, had meetings at 10 and at 2.
Right.
And if somebody said, oh, can you come in at 9:30? I'd say, how about 10? Because I knew if you go into a company before 10, there's a lot of shuffling. People getting their coffee, they're getting warmed up, they're going to their first meeting. And 10 always was the perfect time. You could take them to lunch if you wanted to. If you didn't, that was cool. And then at 2, everyone's back after lunch. But it's not at the end of the day where everybody's trying to, you know, clean up and leave.
Yeah. Yeah, that's after the records and information management career, I moved back into startup, SaaS-based startup project collaboration software. And we would always do our demos post 10 o'clock in the morning for those very reasons. So, and you always allowed, so even if, so you say if you had the hour, you'd always, it would always be an hour and a half, right? So it'd be that
Hopefully,
11:30
yeah.
range. And if you were in person, you had the ability to, you know, hey, Brian, you know, there's a couple of items there that we touched on. You seemed, you know, very, very inquisitive on, very, very interested. You know, do you have a half hour now that we can just have a, like outside of the larger, we have conversation just to make sure that you got exactly what you need from the presentation in the group today? And that could be a coffee, it could be a lunch or other, and then really gives you the opportunity to see the kind of the dynamics of the rest of the folks if you haven't already captured that before in terms of your you know, your demonstration or of your product or service or XYZ, right?
And when you're talking to younger reps, what are they typically asking you? And what do they typically need?
Well, I mean, simply put with some of them, which I like, is just the quickest way to be effective and make money, right? And I'm like,
Right, they start there.
love it.
The
I
easy
said
question.
I love it, and I'll go back to, you know, and try to get a good assessment on kind of who they are. Specifically, is creating structure around the things that are unstructured right now, right?
Yeah.
Getting some formalities in place, some process in place. And it doesn't necessarily have to be my process. It needs to be a process that works for you.
Yeah.
We have all of those processes in terms of the, you know, depending on the size of your organization, that is really kind of the de facto, this is how you do things. This is how you process in order. This is who you talk to. This is what it looks like. This is how you get paid. But define the process and structure that makes sense for you today, and then learn from that, and then have the ability to be dynamic and change that up. So if you're talking about, say, 10 touch points a day, see if you can get to 8, see if you can get to 7 more meaningfully, and see, if the revenue starts to increase, give some time for you, right? Like,
Yes.
book that block off. Like, there's worked for that startup. Was an international company. So my noon till 1 didn't mean anything to anybody else, because that was their 5 to 6 or their 9 to 10. Like, it just didn't matter, right? But what I tell them is block off some of that time for you, whether you're eating lunch or you're on the treadmill or on the bike or whatever. Take that time for you and get that into your structured regimen. And that was kind of one of the largest things that I talked to them about. All the rest, some of it was situational, some of it was coaching and training, and some of them said, hey, I want to see you do it. And I love that. I love those opportunities. It's like, so both, can Brad get off of the Aeron chair and go out and do it? And then to, let's go see, let's use this as a learning experience for both. Right. And then, because in terms of coaching, and then I would bring it back to them in a conversation. And I would always say in the conversation, because they would be involved in the sales process, was we, even if they said no words, we. So we would just position it that, like, so this individual is going to be involved in the sales process, even though they're not really involved in the sales process today. It's we, and eventually it's going to turn to that individual, and I'm going to be the other we that doesn't say much. But after those appointments or calls or like whatever is Zoom meeting or other, I would always ask that sales rep, how did I do? Like, grade me, tell me how I did. Like, walk me through everything that you've learned, say, in your onboarding. Like, where's Brad at? Give Brad a score. Let's talk about it. Right. And then I was always hone in on the delta. Brad was never perfect, and Brad doesn't propose to, like, Brad doesn't profess to be perfect, but let's talk about the 15%, right? What could Brad have done better? Like, let's talk about it and get them really to plug the 15%. And then, but that starts shaping the conversation around, when I'm out with them, they're doing it. Give me some feedback. What does it look like? Where am I at? And then we're focusing on the delta.
Right.
And really, like, they're answering their own questions, but it's about getting engagement happening and consistency happening, right? And for me, that was it. And it kind of all went back to just creating good structure. And for me, what I always look for in reps coming into this industry or coming over from another company is just coachability. They don't necessarily have to be the smartest or be naturally gifted, say, in sales, but if they're coachable, we got a fighting chance, right?
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah.
It's been a great conversation, Brad. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
They can go and follow me on LinkedIn. I've got an active profile. I've just gone on my own for management consulting, and I'm helping folks like that I liked helping before. So startup or scale up, SaaS-based AI or other. Reach out to me. And if for anything kind of like sales related, I'll if I've got the bandwidth, I'll help you out.